Oh, wow. Pura vida. Much love and respect. Thanks for tuning in once again. So again, I'm an Access Genealogy, a free genealogy website. They're getting into Fort Caroline here. Now, Fort Caroline was by the French, so-called French Huguenots. French Huguenots established this fort. So before we read this, right, about Fort Caroline, we're going to be talking about Rene De Laundonniere, right? I just want to talk about who he is first so we could understand, have a better perspective of who are we talking about. All right, as you guys can see, Rene De Laundonniere was a French Huguenot. All right, French Huguenot. We're talking about a Moor Huguenot, founder of the French colony of Fort Caroline, what we're about to read. It says Laundonniere was a Huguenot nobleman and a merchant who's the mariners from Poitou, France. His birth date and family origins are currently unknown. You see, they're hiding who he is. These are cryptos. So again, we're going over the basics, all right, for all the new people and everybody, just to refresh your memory. What is a Huguenot? History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors, by Henry Coopy, Volume 2, 1892. This book is big. This is a part of the book, all right? Talking about Columbus and how he brought Moorish civilization and how his vessels was fitted out in that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. His sailors were many of them men with Moorish blood in their veins. It has been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in the south of France, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots. And that of these many emigrated at a later date to South Carolina. What are we talking about today? South Carolina, people going up there, on these expeditions. But what were they? Moors. They were driven out, they ended up in southern France, and they became known as Huguenots. We're in the book Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. It says both academic studies and informal family histories attest that many of the Spanish and Portuguese colonists in Central and South America, Mexico, and the Caribbean were conversos and moriscos. Although they might appear to be good Catholic Christians on the surface, right, de soto, they were in reality crypto Jews and crypto Muslims, secret Jews and secret Muslims. They practiced the traditions of Judaism and Islam in the privacy of their own homes, sometimes in small de facto communities or intermarried family groups. So, as you can see, a lot of these so-called Europeans were actually crypto Jews, crypto Muslims. They weren't just Catholic Christians, as they told us. Continues, says in 1764, an additional 300 Huguenot settlers arrived in hopes of developing the silk and wine industries. The same two Sephardic Moorish dominated industries attempted in the Virginia colony. Most of the incoming settlers were drawn from La Rochelle and Bordeaux, two French cities with large Sephardic Morisco populations. Earlier in the 1720s, Horisburg on the left bank of the Savannah River had been settled by around 800 French Swiss settlers, which we have argued elsewhere were primarily of Jewish and crypto-Jewish ancestry. Huguenots were descendants of Muslims in Europe. Huguenot history, descriptions, fate in Europe, and their occupations and skills, etc., are so integrally related to Muslims that it is not far-fetched to investigate their being Muslims. All right, this is from a website I had found back in my Huguenots video. Just wanted to show that world-famous silk textile technology of Al-Andalus reaches Britain through Huguenots. All right, so the Huguenots brought this influence to the colonies and to England. And we all know that the Sephardic and Moorish people, the Moors, were in control of Europe and Spain, the Iberia Peninsula for many, many years. All right, these are many references to this. You can go study all of this. This is not me making things up. They were in control for many, many years, so they definitely multiplied. They had many, many families. And when the Inquisition came, they didn't just end up in Africa. Okay, that's hijacked. They went up again to France, Germany, England, Holland, Switzerland, and many other European countries. All right. So I hope you guys understand who the Huguenots are. We're gonna go back. Remember that Laudonniere, the guy we're about to read about, was a Huguenot. Huguenot. Okay. We're back in Access Genealogy website, and it says here Fort Caroline. Fort Caroline dispatched at least 6 small expeditions to explore the interior of the southeast in order to develop trade ties. Most of the expeditions were targeted toward the Appalachian Mountains. Upon the arrival of 600 new colonists, Rene De Laundonniere, the Huguenot, planned to establish the capital of New France at the head of the freight canoe navigation on the Oconee River. This is approximately the location of the University of Georgia today. You see that? The proposed town site was about 50 miles from the Georgia Gold Belt. This was most likely an Indian town where they built their fort, or was already their fort. Spanish forces attacked Fort Caroline on the night of September 20, 1565. So the Catholics came and attacked the Huguenots, who were Protestants, right? Cryptos. Most of the approximately 200 men in the garrison were killed in battle or executed. A handful escaped with the fort's commander, Rene De Laundonniere, right? They escaped, and he did, the Huguenot, right? Somewhere around 6 to 10 men were either away from the fort on a trade mission to the Appalachian Mountains, or else were able to swim away from the fort when it was attacked. 2 of the survivors lived with nearby natives until picked up by the French retaliatory raid in 1568. The best known of traders who were away as Pierre Gambier. He eventually married the daughter of a king. Listen to this. I'm talking about an Indian woman who, Pierre Gambier, these are Huguenots, married an indigenous princess, right? The daughter of a king. Then he became a king himself. And this happened many times, where they would become the chiefs after they married the daughter. And then in history, we just think of them as chiefs. But a lot of them are 100% Europeans or half Europeans. In this case, Huguenot. And he became chief, a Huguenot, a Moor. All right? A story survived that he was eventually assassinated, but other evidence suggests that he created this story to conceal his identity from the Spanish. All right? Fort Caroline, we'll get more into that. Right now, we're going to read the book, The History of the Caribbean Islands. This was written originally by Charles Rochefort and translated into English, right? This is from 1666, all right? Very old book, primary source. Around page 240 of this book is talking about when they say the Appalachians met God, or actually were introduced to Christianity. And it was by the French Huguenot, Ribauld. They tell you right here, he brought it and he left the seed there. As it says here in 242, these happy beginnings and first fruits of the gospel of our Savior, of Jesus, I dodged the hijack, were afterwards augmented and advanced by the cares of Monsieur the Admiral de Coligny, who gave a commission to one De Laundonniere. Remember Laudonniere? He was the one that established Fort Caroline. He was French Huguenot. All right, this is a Moor. To carry over thither a considerable supply of soldiers and all sorts of tradesmen, which arrived in the year 1564. But their last adventurers had hardly taken the air in the country after their arrival thither, ere the Spaniard, who imagines that all America belongs to him, and who have ever been jealous of the French nation, made his advancement of the disorders which were then in that country. All right, so basically what they're saying is, he invited, the French Huguenots, Laudonniere. Remember, he built Fort Caroline and other forts. But as soon as they were established there, he's saying the Spanish came and went after the French nation, but it's actually Catholics versus, the Protestants, or the Huguenots. So they go on to say that they sent Peter Melendez, we already got the story, right? With 6 great ships full of men and ammunition, who fell upon it on the 19th of September. It says here, continuing down, says Captain Ribauld fell in the massacre. But De Laundonniere, remember he escaped, made it swift to escape through the fence to the ships newly come from France, which by good fortune were still in the road. Some others of the inhabitants who upon the first arrival of the Spaniards had foreseen the danger likely to fall upon them got in time into the woods. I letting you know that a lot of these Huguenots had already bounced. They had gone into the woods. All right, they survived. They mixed with the Indians, and in the night time came to the village of their good friend Saturiwa. All right, they went to their Timicuan chieftain friend, who hating the Spaniard gave them protection and supplied them with provisions for a competent subsistence till the year, and you guys can break down the year, when Captain de Gorgis, all right, now we're talking about Captain de Gorgis, we just read about him, right? And what he did, he got his revenge, right? Coming to Florida with 3 stout ships full of resolute men and all sorts of ammunition. Remember, he was coming. He had a plan. Severely punished the cruelty of the Spaniards, and being assisted by the Saturiwa, right, with the help of the Indians, right? The Huguenot, with the help of the Indians, took over the Catholics, and all his neighbors and allies. He revenged the public injuries of the French, put into the sword all the Spaniards he met with, not only in the fort of Carolina, which they had repaired and fortified after their usurpation of it, but also those he found in 2 other forts which they had built along the coast, which he burned and demolished, as may be seen in the 12th chapter of the 4th book of the description of the West Indies, written by John de Laundonniere. The memorials which Captain de Gorgis caused to be printed, giving an account of his expedition into Florida, tell us of a certain Frenchman named Peter Dubry, who, having made his escape to King Saturiwa to avoid the cruelty of the Spaniards, related to him that there escaped of that massacre but 10 men, of which number he was one, that they all met with a safe retreat in the territories of the said prince, who lived not far from their desolated colony, that 3 of the escaped persons did there some months after that defeat, that of the 7 remaining there were 6 were so charmed with the advantageous relation with the subjects of Saturiwa made to them daily, of the treasures of King Maida, of the powerfulness of another whose name was Olaca, who commanded 40 princes, and of the generosity and prudent conduct of the king of the Appalachia, who governed many fair and large provinces seated at the foot of the mountains, and reaching into several delightful vales which they encompassed, that they importuned Saturiwa, who had entertained them so kindly that he would be pleased to allow them guides to conduct them to the frontiers of the kingdom of the last name, of whom they had heard so many miracles, and had particularly this recommendation, that he was a lover of strangers, and that his subjects were the most civilly governed of all the septentrional part of America. The Saturiwa, willing to add that favor to all those they had received from him before, gave them a good convoy, consisting of the most valiant of his subjects, to conduct them with all safety to all his allies to the dominions of the king of Appalachia, if they were desirous to visit him. All right, so it goes on. I just wanted you guys to see that, yeah, Moors and Sephardic Jews were being treated good a lot of the time by many indigenous tribes, in this case, the Timucua chieftains and the Appalachites people. The king of the Appalachia was very well known to be very friendly with anybody going against the Catholics. So that was Moors and Sephardic Jews.